The younger sister of former First Lady Jackie Kennedy Onassis has died. Lee Radziwill was born Carolyn Lee Bouvier. She was a social icon and former princess. She was married to Prince Radziwill of Poland and had 2 children with him.
After the death of Lee Radziwill, many people expected her wealth to be divided among close family members, friends, and perhaps even charitable causes. However, what was later revealed surprised many and changed how people viewed her final decisions. Instead of spreading her fortune across multiple hands, she chose to leave her entire fortune to just one person.
He'd taken me to see several Stone concerts here in the garden. So he said, the Rolling Stone magazine asked Truman if...
This choice raised quiet questions about her relationships, her past emotions, and the true meaning behind her final will. Was it a personal decision shaped by love, regret, or unfinished bonds? And why did she choose only one heir when her life was filled with many important connections? The will that shocked everyone. In February 2019, Lee Radziwill passed away in New York at the age of 85. For many people, her death felt like the quiet closing of a long chapter in high society. She had lived a life surrounded by elegance, powerful names, and global attention. But what happened after her passing is what truly caught people off guard. Now think about this for a moment. When someone who has lived such a rich and connected life passes away, what do you expect to happen to their wealth? Do you expect a long list of beneficiaries, close friends, family members, maybe even charities? That is usually how these stories go. But in this case, everything took a very different turn. After her death, it was revealed that her estate was worth more than $50 million. Yes, more than $50 million. For someone who, at certain points in her life, was believed to be struggling financially, this number alone raised a lot of questions. Where did all this wealth come from? How was it preserved? And more importantly, who would receive it? Then came the biggest surprise. Lee made a decision that left many people stunned. She chose to leave her entire fortune to just one person. Her daughter, Anna Christina Radziwill, also known as Tina, was named as the sole heir. At first, that might sound simple. A mother leaving everything to her child does not seem unusual, right? But when you look closer, everything starts to feel a bit more complicated. Here is where things become interesting. Even though Tina was the only beneficiary, the structure of the will was not as straightforward as people expected. Only half of the estate's value was set to go directly to her. The rest was tied to the sale of Lee's assets. That means properties, belongings, and other valuables would need to be sold off before the remaining money could be fully passed on. So now you have to ask yourself, why structure it this way? Why not just transfer everything directly? And it does not stop there. Another detail made people even more curious. Lee appointed 2 male executors to manage her estate. So now, the real question becomes, was this just a will? Or was it the final move in a much deeper story? Because when you look closely, everything points to something bigger. Living in a shadow she never chose. When people talk about Lee Radziwill, one thing always seems to come up first. Not her style, not her achievements, not even her personal life. It is her connection to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Now, think about that for a second. Imagine building a life filled with influence, creativity, and recognition, yet being constantly introduced through someone else. Do you think that feels fair? Or does it slowly start to shape how a person sees themselves? For Lee, this was not something that happened later in life. It started early and stayed with her for years. Even though she moved in the same elite circles, attended top schools, and carried herself with elegance, she was always seen as the younger sister. Jacqueline stood out in ways that were hard to ignore. She was known for her intelligence, her poise, and her ability to impress those around her. People admired her openly. They celebrated her. And then there was Lee, not invisible, but never quite at the center. Everything around them seemed to create a quiet comparison. It was not always spoken, but it was always there. One sister praised a little louder, one sister noticed a little more. And over time, that kind of difference begins to settle deep inside. Do you think a child does not notice that? Lee reportedly felt that her father gave more attention to Jacqueline. That kind of feeling, especially at a young age, does not just disappear. It grows. It stays. It becomes something you carry into adulthood without even realizing it. Jacqueline was often seen as the ideal daughter, strong in her studies, admired by others, and held up as an example. That kind of image creates pressure for anyone standing beside it. For Lee, it meant constantly being measured without anyone saying the words out loud. And here is the thing. Lee was not lacking, not in beauty, not in charm, not in talent. She had her own presence, her own way of standing out. She became known as a global socialite, a fashion icon, someone who was always listed among the best-dressed women in the world. People respected her taste, her connections, and her ability to move effortlessly through high society. But still, the label remained, Jackie's sister. It sounds simple, but when you really think about it, it carries weight. It quietly reduces a person's identity into something smaller. No matter how much Lee achieved, the comparison followed her. Do you think that affects how someone makes decisions later in life? Because when a person feels overlooked or placed second, they often start searching for something that feels fully theirs, something that cannot be compared, something that gives them control over their own story. For Lee, that feeling of being second did not come from one moment. It was built slowly, from childhood experiences, from family dynamics, from the way attention was given and received. She grew up in an environment where status, image, and perception mattered deeply. That made the comparison even stronger. Everything was visible. Everything was noticed. And in that kind of world, even small differences feel very big. Over time, this creates something deeper than simple sibling rivalry. This was not just about two sisters competing for attention. It was about imbalance. A quiet, lasting imbalance that shaped how Lee saw herself and her place in the world. She maintained a close relationship with Jacqueline for many years. They traveled together, spent time with family, and supported each other during important moments. From the outside, everything looked strong and united. And that is where things begin to shift. Because for Lee, love was not just love, it was escape. 3 marriages, 3 escapes, 0 peace. When you take a closer look at the life of Lee Radziwill, her marriages begin to reveal something deeper than romance. They were not just relationships built on love or attraction. They were decisions shaped by emotion, pressure, and a quiet need to step out of a life where she constantly felt compared. Now think about this carefully. If someone spends years feeling like they are standing next to a stronger, brighter presence, do you think they might search for a place where they can finally feel fully seen? That is exactly what begins to show through each of Lee's marriages. Her first marriage came very early, at the age of 21, when she chose to marry Michael Temple Canfield. At that stage in her life, this decision carried more than just emotional meaning. It was also about gaining independence. She wanted distance from her mother's strong influence and control, and marriage seemed like the clearest way to achieve that. Michael appeared to offer everything she needed at the time. He was well-connected, respected in publishing, and financially secure. From the outside, the match looked balanced and promising, especially for someone eager to step into her own life. After the wedding, they settled in London, living in a beautiful home that reflected comfort and status. Their early days together had the appearance of stability, and everything suggested that Lee had made the right decision. But when you look beneath the surface, the reality was very different. Michael struggled heavily with alcoholism, and this was not a minor issue that could be ignored or controlled easily. It affected his behavior and created serious strain within the marriage. There were moments when his condition became severe, to the point where his health and safety were at risk. Although he made attempts to recover, these efforts did not last long enough to bring real change. Over time, the emotional weight of the situation grew heavier, and the marriage began to lose its foundation. So now, consider this. When the very relationship that was meant to bring freedom starts to feel unstable and overwhelming, what does a person do? For Lee, the answer became clear. The marriage could not continue, and it eventually came to an end. What began as an escape had turned into another form of difficulty, leaving her once again searching for something better. Her second marriage brought a completely different kind of transformation. This time, she married Prince Stanisław Albrecht Radziwill, stepping into the world of royalty. This was not just a new relationship, it was a shift in identity, status, and lifestyle. Becoming a princess placed her in a position of global attention, where everything about her life carried a sense of prestige. It seemed like a moment where she had finally stepped into something truly her own, something that could not be compared in the same way as before. During this marriage, Lee had 2 children, Anthony and Christina, and this added a new dimension to her life. She was no longer only focused on herself or her place in society. She now had a family to care for, and this brought both responsibility and meaning. From the outside, this stage of her life appeared complete, combining status, family, and influence. However, just like her first marriage, this one also faced serious challenges. There were reports that Prince Stanisław had multiple relationships outside the marriage, which created tension and weakened trust. At the same time, Lee herself was linked to emotional connections beyond the relationship, suggesting that both partners were drifting apart in different ways. When you look at situations like this, it becomes clear that stability cannot exist where trust is constantly under pressure. Eventually, the marriage ended in divorce in the mid-1970s. What makes this relationship different, however, is how Lee later spoke about it. Despite everything that went wrong, she still regarded Prince Stanisław as the most meaningful partner in her life. That detail says a lot about how deeply she felt connected to him. It suggests that even though the relationship did not last, it came closer than the others to giving her a sense of fulfillment. Now think about that for a moment. Is it possible for a relationship to fail and still hold the greatest emotional value? In Lee's case, the answer seems to be yes. Years later, she entered her third marriage with Herbert Ross, a well-known figure in the film industry. By this point, Lee had already experienced the highs and lows of 2 very different marriages, and this new relationship appeared to be a final attempt to find stability. Herbert's career brought her into the world of Hollywood, a space filled with creativity, influence, and strong personalities. It was a different environment from the aristocratic and social circles she was used to, offering a new kind of experience. However, this setting did not fully appeal to her. She expressed clear dissatisfaction with the culture of Hollywood, describing it as overly focused on exclusivity and surface-level appearances. This disconnect made it difficult for her to feel comfortable in that world. Over time, the relationship began to weaken, not because of one single issue, but because the connection itself lacked the depth she seemed to be searching for. In 2001, the marriage ended in divorce, bringing her third and final attempt at lasting partnership to a close. When you look at these 3 marriages together, a clear pattern begins to form. Each one represented a new direction, a new environment, and a new possibility. Yet none of them provided lasting peace. This is not simply a story of relationships that did not work out. It is a reflection of a deeper search for identity and belonging. Lee was not just choosing partners. She was trying to build a life that felt entirely her own, separate from the comparisons that had followed her since childhood. So now the question becomes more meaningful. Was she ever truly able to escape that shadow, or did it quietly follow her into every decision she made? The man who came between sisters. At this stage in her life, the relationship between Lee Radziwill and her sister was already carrying quiet tension that had built over many years. It was not always obvious to the public, and it was rarely spoken about directly, but it existed beneath everything. Then a new presence entered their world, and this presence did not just add to the tension, it changed it completely. That presence was Aristotle Onassis, a man whose influence would go far beyond social connections and into something deeply personal between the 2 sisters. Onassis was not a stranger to their circle. He was already known among the elite, moving easily through the same high-level social spaces as Lee and her family. He was wealthy, confident, and very influential, and people naturally paid attention to him. Lee became close to him during this time, and their connection appeared strong and meaningful. While the exact nature of their relationship was never officially confirmed, it is clear that they shared more than a simple acquaintance. They spent time together, attended gatherings, and developed a bond that seemed important to her. especially at a time when she was still shaping her identity outside of constant comparison. Now think about this carefully. When someone enters your life during a period where you are searching for independence and emotional clarity, do you think that connection becomes more valuable? For Lee, this bond with Onassis seemed to represent something personal, something that belonged to her alone in a life where very little ever felt entirely hers. It was not just about attraction or admiration, it was about having a connection that felt separate from her sister's influence. Then everything shifted in a way no one could have fully prepared for. In the year 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy changed the course of history and deeply affected the family. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis lost her husband in a moment that brought both personal grief and global attention. During this difficult time, Lee stood by her sister, offering support and remaining present as Jacqueline faced one of the most painful experiences of her life. From the outside, it looked like a moment of strong family unity and shared strength. However, while Lee was supporting her sister, another connection was quietly growing. Jacqueline began to spend more time with Onassis, and their relationship gradually became closer. What may have started as support and comfort during a time of loss soon developed into something deeper. Onassis offered Jacqueline a way to step away from the intense public pressure that surrounded her, giving her a sense of privacy and escape that she needed at that moment. Over time, their bond strengthened, and eventually, they entered a romantic relationship that led to marriage. Now pause and consider what this meant for Lee. From her perspective, this was not just about her sister finding comfort after a tragedy. It felt much more personal. She believed that her connection with Onassis had come first, and this belief made the situation difficult to accept. It created the feeling that something important to her had been taken and transformed into something she could no longer access. When you combine this with her long history of feeling compared and placed second, the emotional impact becomes much stronger. This situation was not simply about jealousy or rivalry. It carried deeper meaning for Lee. It seemed to reflect a pattern she had experienced throughout her life, where something connected to her would eventually shift toward her sister. Even though there was no public confirmation of a romantic relationship between Lee and Onassis, the emotional reality still existed. And sometimes, what a person feels internally can be more powerful than what is officially stated. From the outside, people could only observe and speculate, but from Lee's point of view, the situation felt clear. It was not just about a man, but about what his presence represented in her life. It represented a connection she valued, a sense of individuality she was trying to build, and a moment where she believed she had something that was truly her own. When that changed, it affected how she saw both the relationship and her place within it. After Jacqueline married Onassis, the distance between the sisters became more noticeable. They did not openly express conflict in a way that was fully visible to the public, but the emotional shift was clear. Their connection was no longer what it had once been, and the closeness they shared began to weaken. The change was not sudden or dramatic, but it was steady and lasting. When you look at this situation closely, it becomes clear that it was not just a simple disagreement or misunderstanding. It was a turning point that reshaped their relationship in a way that could not easily be reversed. Two sisters who had always been connected, yet quietly divided, were now facing a situation that made those divisions more real than ever. And just when it seemed like the emotional distance between them had reached its limit, something else happened that would push them even further apart. When family broke for good. At this point, the relationship between Lee Radziwill and her sister was already fragile. There had been years of quiet comparison, emotional distance, and moments that slowly pushed them apart. But what happened next did not just add tension. It created a break that felt much deeper, something that touched not only their bond as sisters, but also Lee's role as a mother. Now think about this carefully. What happens when a family issue is no longer just between two people, but begins to involve the next generation? That is when things stop being simple. That is when emotions become harder to manage and much more personal. Lee's daughter, Christina, was going through her own struggles during this time. She faced serious issues with body image and self-esteem, and these challenges affected her emotional well-being in a strong way. Growing up in a world where appearance, status, and public image mattered so much, only made things more difficult. Imagine being surrounded by beauty, elegance, and constant attention, yet feeling uncomfortable within yourself. Do you think that would be easy to handle? Christina needed support, understanding, and a space where she felt accepted without pressure. But instead of growing closer to her mother during this time, something unexpected happened. She began to feel more comfortable with her aunt, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Now pause and think about how complex that situation is. A daughter who is struggling emotionally begins to find peace and comfort not with her own mother, but with her mother's sister. That alone can create confusion and tension. But it did not stop there. Over time, Christina's connection with Jacqueline became stronger, while her relationship with Lee grew more distant. It was not just about preference, it reflected a deeper emotional shift. Christina felt understood and supported in a way that she may not have experienced at home. Whether Lee recognized these signs or not, the gap between them continued to widen. Then came the moment that changed everything. Without warning, without any discussion, Christina made a decision that shocked Lee. She quietly gathered her belongings and moved out of her mother's home. She did not explain her plan ahead of time. She did not prepare her mother for what was coming. Instead, she went to live with Jacqueline. Now ask yourself this: how would a mother feel in that situation? One day, everything appears normal, and the next, her daughter has chosen to leave and live with someone else, especially someone so closely connected to an already complicated relationship. For Lee, this was not just surprising, it was deeply painful. This moment created a feeling that went beyond disappointment. It felt like a replacement. Not only had she spent years feeling second to her sister in many areas of life, but now even her own daughter seemed to choose Jacqueline over her. That kind of experience does not just hurt. It changes how a person sees their relationships completely. The emotional impact of this situation was strong. It added another layer to the distance that had already formed between the sisters. What was once a quiet tension now became something more visible and harder to repair. A point where things changed in a way that could not easily return to what they once were. And once a relationship reaches that level of distance, the question becomes harder to answer. Can it ever truly be repaired? Or does it simply continue, shaped by everything that has already happened? The life she built when no one was watching. By now, most people would expect the story of Lee Radziwill to be defined only by her family drama, her marriages, and her connection to her sister. But here is something many people overlook. While the public was focused on headlines, emotions, and comparisons, Lee was quietly building a life that had nothing to do with any of that. Now think about this for a moment. What does a person do when they feel constantly watched, constantly compared, and constantly misunderstood? Some people try to fight it loudly. Others step away and create something private, something controlled, something entirely their own. That second path is the one Lee chose, and it changed everything about how her life should really be understood. While attention remained fixed on Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Lee moved in a different direction. She did not disappear. Instead, she refined her presence in a quieter, more intentional way. One of the strongest examples of this was her work in interior design, which she began taking seriously in the mid-1970s. After gaining experience through her own homes and collaborations, she officially launched her business in 1976. This was not just a hobby, but a professional step. She focused on creating elegant, balanced spaces with a refined European style, never loud, but thoughtful and detailed. Now ask yourself, in a world that values boldness, what does choosing subtlety say? It shows confidence and identity. Lee's work attracted wealthy clients who truly appreciated her taste. Her designs were not for everyone. They were made for people who valued quiet beauty and sophistication. Her work became strong enough to be featured in Architectural Digest, which is one of the most respected publications in design. That kind of recognition does not happen easily. It reflects both quality and consistency. It showed that Lee was not just experimenting. She was succeeding. But her creative life did not stop there. She also became closely connected to Truman Capote, a well-known figure in literary and social circles. Through this connection, she became part of a group often referred to as his swans, which included women who were admired for their style, influence, and presence in high society. Now think about what this means. Even in a world where she was often seen as second, Lee managed to secure her own place among some of the most admired and influential women of her time. She built relationships based on shared taste and understanding, not just family ties. Her sense of style also became one of her strongest forms of expression. Over time, she was recognized globally as a fashion icon. Her clothing choices, her presentation, and her overall appearance reflected a level of refinement that people respected and admired. This recognition reached a major point when she was inducted into the Vanity Fair Best Dressed Hall of Fame in the mid-1990s. That is not a small achievement. It means her influence in fashion was not temporary. It was lasting. Even designers took notice. Giorgio Armani counted her among those who influenced his work and vision. Now, consider that carefully. So, when people think about Lee, it is important to look beyond the obvious, because the life she built when no one was watching may actually be the most honest version of who she truly was. The final irony: everything comes full circle. As the story of Lee Radziwill reaches its final stage, something unexpected begins to stand out. For someone who lived among wealth, influence, and high society, her financial reality in later years was not always as stable as many people assumed. Now think about this carefully. When someone spends most of their life surrounded by luxury, people naturally believe that money will always be there. But in Lee's case, that was not entirely true. Over time, she faced financial pressure that required difficult decisions. She sold properties, including valuable homes, and let go of certain assets. These were not small changes. They reflected a need to adjust her lifestyle and manage her resources more carefully. There are also suggestions that she may have relied on financial support set up earlier in her life, possibly through family arrangements. So now ask yourself this: how does someone move from a life of visible luxury to a position where maintaining that lifestyle becomes a challenge? It shows that appearances do not always match reality, even in high social circles. But here is the surprising part. After her passing in 2019, her estate was revealed to be worth over $50 million. For many, this was unexpected, creating a contrast between her apparent struggles and the wealth she left behind. Now, consider what that means. Despite selling properties and managing resources, she still held significant value. This suggests her wealth was structured in less visible ways. In her final will, Lee chose to leave everything to her daughter, Christina, also known as Tina. This is the same daughter whose relationship with her had once been strained, the same daughter who had chosen to leave her home and live with her sister. So what does this decision represent? Is it a simple act of inheritance, or is there something deeper behind it? Because when you look at their history, this choice carries emotional weight. It brings together years of distance, misunderstanding, and quiet pain. After everything that happened, was this her way of finding peace? Or was it simply the last chapter in a story that was always more complex than it appeared? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.